Right, looks like everyone was able to join from the waiting room okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to CSG South's annual Fiscal Physical, where we check up on the budgetary and fiscal health of states. This is our second policy webinar, 2026. For those of you who don't know, my name is Cody Allen, and I'm a senior policy analyst with the Council State Government's Southern Office, or CSG South. Although many of you, especially the lawmakers or staff on the call, may know us better by the moniker of our annual convening, the Southern Legislative Conference, or the SLC. Now, before we get started with our excellent presentation today, just a few housekeeping notes and a brief overview for those of you familiar with our organization. Y'all will see on your screen that you have the option to raise your hands, to chat, to submit questions for our Q&A at the end. If you put in chat, if you're having any technical issues, and one of my colleagues on the call will message you and try to help sort you out if you have any audio or visual issues. And then also after our presentation is done, we'll have a few pre-submitted questions that I had from folks before we'll open it up to the Q&A for the folks who are on the call today and are able to attend live. This will be recorded and posted on our website, along with the contact information for our presenter and details on the resources that she is going to mention. So before I introduce our presenter and get started, just briefly wanted to introduce who we are in case any of you are not familiar. So as I mentioned, we're the Council State Government Southern Office, or CSG South. The Council State Government has existed for nearly 100 years now, going back to 1933, to help support states to ensure that, but states are working on the same issues, that you have a lot of connections and coordination with your colleagues around the country. We know what's happening in Tennessee is relevant to what's happening in Michigan or Virginia or Texas. And so our job as the Council State Government is to connect you all with your peers across the country, identify trends, and support you as extensions of your offices and of your staff. For our Southern office, we're also nearly 100 years old, from 1947. We are comprised of 15 states in the South, pretty much your typical definition of the South, from Texas and Oklahoma, Missouri, all the way through to West Virginia, and down the coast of Florida. We have 15 staff members. We're ever growing, and we're all from the South or transplants to the South, and we're here to support you and think of everyone on our team as an extension of your staff, extension of your office, and just here to lend a helping hand whenever we can. As part of this webinar and some of our other events you may be familiar with, is providing policy research support and analysis through our 6 standing committees. This particular webinar is through our Fiscal Affairs and Government Operations Committee. And you'll see a QR code on your screen, and it's also available on our website, but there's a link to submit external information requests. Those are requests to help you while you're debating legislation, whether you're looking for what other states are doing on a topic, and that's available 365 throughout the year. I know in the beginning of the lead up to session, as you all are preparing your bills and bill drafting, that is probably when we get most of our requests, and I'm sure many of you on the call have used it before. And we can also connect you with resources from partners such as Pew, Casey, and other groups that we work with. As I mentioned, we also support lawmakers and staff through professional development opportunities, such as the Center for the Advancement of Leadership Skills, or CALS, and SAGE, which is the Staff Academy for Governmental Excellence. And then we also have a Legislative Service Agency Directors Group and a staff committee for intergovernmental leadership, or SAIL. In the fall, we'll also put on what we call policy master classes. These are often domestic and occasionally international trips that are invite only, where we take you to various places around the country or even abroad to look at key policy issues and topics over several days for a group of 12 to 25 lawmakers and staff. Lastly, like today, we're joined by a wonderful presenter from the Pew Charitable Trusts, but we have partnerships with groups such as Arnold Venture, Pew, Adelphi, Casey Family Programs, to make sure that we are helping your states and offices have access to the information and knowledge they need to do the best they can for their states. briefly, the SLC, or Southern Legislative Conference, is our largest event every year. We have anywhere from 1,200 to over 2,000 attendees. This year, it is going to be in Lexington, Kentucky, July 11th through 15th, 2026. Registration should be going out the first week of February, I believe. So check your inboxes and you can make sure that you register and sign up to attend. All right, so thank you for letting me speed run through a little bit about our organization. As I mentioned, we have a presentation next, after which I'll ask our panelists some of the pre-submitted questions I received from y'all before opening up to any live questions that you all may have. So we're very pleased and privileged to be joined today by Liz Farmer, the Senior Officer with the Pew Charitable Trust's Fiscal 50 projects. You may have seen Liz's name, like I have, on many things from Governing Magazine, Forbes, Route 50, pretty much any policy story you're reading in an article about budgets, about rainy day funds, reserves, probably has her name attached to the byline. So we're very excited to have her join us today and give us a little update on some of the implications for state budgets and trends we're seeing around the country and in the South. So Liz, thank you so much for joining us today. And I am going to turn over the screen sharing to you.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to everyone on the webinar for attending. And I am going to attempt to share my screen and hopefully nothing goes wrong. So I will give this a start. But actually, before I do, Pew Charitable Trusts is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization focused on evidence-based research. And in many areas of public policy, the folks I'm with, of course, are in state fiscal policy. And my particular team that I'm on is Fiscal 50, and we're really focused on a set of indicators across all 50 states, providing data to help lawmakers make informed decisions about their budgets. And so here comes the big test, the big tech test for me. Now I also have to remember how to actually.
All right. It went through. It looks like
Did it go through?
We're seeing your presenter mode. So I think it just needs to change to a different screen.
Okay.
See if that'll work.
I apologize. I should have figured this out before. Oh, there we go. I don't. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Okay. There we go. Perfect. You can see it now.
And with that, we've established the baseline expectations. Okay. It's all about the data. Alrighty, so I'm going to walk you through some of the kind of 50 state overview of what the budget and economic trends have been leading into this year. And with a couple of extra slides on the southern region. I already introduced Fiscal 50. This is just some of the examples of the indicators I mentioned, the stuff that we track. This data is updated either annually or semi-annually on our website. It's all interactive, all free, all downloadable, shareable, all of the cool, fun, modern things that anyone would ever want in terms of data. The other piece of Fiscal 50 that I neglected to mention earlier is our regular content series. This is a lot of what I do. These are news analyses about developments going on in state houses, in states, and we're applying that policy lens and those kinds of takeaways to those developments. These publish once, sometimes twice a month, and as you can see, we cover quite a bit. A lot of our content recently, of course, has been regarding what's going on with the federal government and how that affects state policy and budgets. But now on to the good stuff. So tax revenue trends. The data I'm about to talk about has, you guys are getting a sneak peek. This is soon to be published, but not published yet. But this is what we're seeing as of in the most recent tax revenue update that's going to be in our website in a month or two. So pictures tell 1,000 words, right? Tax revenues have, after a big swell following the post-pandemic, or following the initial onset of the pandemic, they declined starting in 2023. the growth in 21 and 2022 were the highest and second highest growth rates in tax revenue of the past 25 years. We published a policy brief a little just after this time, trying to quantify how much of this revenue could be considered like a one-time boost. And I'll mention that a little bit later. But this picture also kind of shows it. That dotted line is the long-term growth trend for revenue. So as you can see, following that swell, revenues declined, and quite naturally so. When you have larger than normal revenue growth, you're going to have the growth is going to start to fall down from that. It peaked at about 15% above that long-term trend line in 2022. And then has somewhat, and then came down, and that it's somewhat stabilized since then. As you can see, it's kind of starting the dotted line and the solid line are starting to get closer together. And while I hate the term new normal, because I feel like nobody knows what it means, I think stabilizing revenue growth is a fair term here for describing what's happened in the last year or so. However, following that come down from 2022 and 2021, what was unusual about that is that you did see actually revenue contract in those years, and if inflation adjusted tax revenue did fall during those years in fiscal 2023 and again in 2024. It's the first time that has happened outside of a recession in at least 40 years. So you had a big swell, and then revenue was starting to come back down again. As of late, what does that mean? So things have somewhat stabilized in fiscal 2025. Inflation adjusted revenue did increase in over half of states. As I mentioned, that is a contrast from the last couple of years of dealing with revenue contractions or very much slowing revenue. That is still underperforming from that long-term trend line, though, about 2.5% under it. And that long-term trend, just so you all are aware, is a 15-year rolling trend that we track. And the reason we look at the long-term trends is because look at that solid line. It goes way up, it goes down. We need to have a kind of a longer line of sight on what on what we might be able to expect in the future and how to place today's data in that kind of longer term context. And so looking at the long-term trend is really helpful for that. It's funny to think of looking back as a way to peek around the corner, but this is the way that we try to do that with the data, is by placing things always in that kind of decade plus context. State by state, as I mentioned, those back-to-back years of declines came to an end, but budget conditions are still tightening. In the second quarter of 2025, 40, which would be the last few months of fiscal 2025, 40 states, in 40 of them, total tax collections underperformed their long-term trend. The furthest below were Iowa, Nebraska, Arkansas. There were still a number of states that still were kind of performing above their long-term trend lines. Alaska, New Mexico, and Vermont were some of the biggest. And two of those, of course, are states that Alaska significantly relies on oil revenue, and it certainly plays a big role in New Mexico's revenues as well. So what happened in that this spring also is that about half of states revised down their revenue estimates for fiscal 2026. And as you all can recall, at this time, there's growing economic and federal uncertainties. We knew that federal changes were coming as far as policy, but the reconciliation bill had yet to be passed. There was the tariff announcement, so a lot of uncertainty, and a number of forecasts were revised downward, which happened right as state budgets were either kind of in the thick of it or trying to wrap up. And so that created a little bit more difficult budgeting season in many places. A number of state legislatures went into overtime last year, and some still don't have a budget. Pennsylvania's budget just got finalized not too long ago. So looking ahead into fiscal 2026 now, preliminary data from the Urban Institute, which is what we use, shows that state tax collections still remain stagnant during this current fiscal year, growing about a 0.4% through the first few months of fiscal 2026. And increasingly limited resources does mean less fiscal flexibility, fewer funds available for key public services. All that equals some tough decisions ahead. Looking at the southern region, we look at medians across 4 regions, and so this what I'm showing you now is kind of that same stuff from that previous chart, but just in bar form. So that dark line is the difference from the state's long-term trend, and as you can see in the South, most states are trending below their long-term trend, other than South Carolina. And as far as we're looking at all across all 4 regions in the country, the South's median is about a little over 3.5% below the region's long-term trend. That's lower than any of the other regions, although no one region is killing it, right? Like in the Northeast, the highest above their long-term trend. It's only just a hair above 0.26, or sorry, below. So again, this just kind of underscores that all states are kind of tightening up here when it comes to tax revenue. I will note that one of the reasons the southern states are kind of are over 3.5% below trend is some of that's intentional. There were a number of states during that during the revenue surplus years passed tax cuts. Some of them were ongoing. Some of them were like one time, like rebates. Some of them were phased in. So if it's an ongoing tax cut, there's a revenue related trigger to step it down another level, that kind of thing. And so several states in the southern region did pass tax cuts, determining that that forward budgets would be able to accommodate that. And so that is likely one of the reasons that this region in particular sits where it is because that was, part of this was intentional and on purpose in terms of shrinking revenues to a point to provide tax relief to taxpayers. And okay, so on to reserves. Again, national overview. And again, a picture tells it all, right? So reserves still remain at either record highs in terms of dollar amount or close to it. So 2025, which is the most recent data that we've compiled, they're almost 100, the dollar amount, it's almost 165 billion. The median state, we look at it in terms of operating days, which is a much more helpful way to think about it in terms of what capacity, how can my reserves actually help out in terms of covering stuff that the budget covers. So we look at it as a percentage of spending. The median state has about a little under 13% of spending, and that's but overall annual spending, which is equivalent to just under 47 operating days. So about almost about a month and a half. The decline we've experienced recently is the first decline in capacity since the Great Recession, but obviously the reserves are still much stronger than they were before the Great Recession and still remain historically strong. And even with that, again, dollar amount versus capacity. So some states still increased their rainy day funds in terms of capacity in the past fiscal year. 29 states added to it in terms of dollars. There is a wide variance, though, across the states. You've got Wyoming with 9 months of spending in its reserves. New Jersey, it withdrew, so it's got zero days once again in its reserves. So this huge variance across the states. But reserves, of course, aren't the only thing that states can rely on in terms of a bridge to getting through some tighter economic times. Total ending balances are also a big a very useful and even more flexible option for states. And ending balances combined with reserves equals total balances. And so what you've seen here is that total balances are falling further. So reserves fell a bit, but total balances fell further, which tells us that those ending balances, the money left over in the checking account after we've paid all the bills, that is, states are definitely drawing down on that. 40 states spent some amount or a lot of amount of money from their ending balances in the past fiscal year. 5 spent all of it, and another 12 spent more than half. And again, not a bad thing. This is all just drawing down on ending balances. There's no good or bad about it. It's how that money is spent. Is it spent to cover an ongoing expense, or is it spent on a one-time thing? That is the real question to ask when we're looking at ending balances. But again, ending balances were pretty high because a lot of states had those surpluses, and states did spend surplus dollars not just on tax relief, but on new programs, putting extra money into reserves, putting more money into their pensions, things that ultimately can help really, really stabilize, or at least allow them more fiscal flexibility in their general fund when they need it. In the South, we have a different picture than that last regional slide I showed you. The total balances are highest in the South. Again, I mentioned surplus revenue. I mentioned tax cuts. This is all connected. So, in the South, the number of days each state could run on their total balances is a little over 100 days. That is much higher than any other region. So to me, that says the southern states still have some kind of fuel in the tank there when it comes to that. On the spending side of the ledger, Medicaid, as we know, is one of the largest or the largest spending line item in state budgets. States spent about 15% of their own source revenue on Medicaid in fiscal year 2023, and that is the year that we have the most recent data for. The update is coming soon, so that's a little under $300 billion total. It's under the 15-year average, still higher than 2022. And as you can see, this looks like kind of like a rocky line graph here. And what's happened is that with the COVID pandemic and with this large swell in spending, states got some extra help from the federal government in terms of paying for Medicaid with the temporary share change to that. I'm blanking on the correct word. Medicaid is not is one of my other colleagues. He produces this data. So states did get some additional federal funding for Medicaid, but then also when state spending increases, as it did during the pandemic, that kind of percentage of total spending portion of Medicaid did go down. And so that's some of what's happening here. But looking ahead, there remains real pressures on Medicaid spending. Following the pandemic, enrollment declined as expected, but it didn't decline as much as it didn't decline to pre-pandemic levels. And then on top of that, the folks who remained in Medicaid, they're using their healthcare more than the folks who are not on Medicaid anymore after that pandemic protections ended. So what that means is that maybe if states expected to see some kind of savings from Medicaid disenrollment, that's being overtaken by the increased costs of those who remain in the program, and it's expected that is something that is going to continue. The share of state budgets that is spent on Medicaid is likely to remain elevated, and then of course potential the shifts in federal policy that could reshape program. The program's fiscal footprint is another factor here, of course, that we don't know that's going to look like. That again, what we can think about from that post-pandemic learning is that while there is lower enrollment expected to happen in Medicaid due to these federal policy changes that are coming to the program, the costs still are likely to remain higher per enrollee, and so that's it makes it difficult to kind of math out the potential, the savings or not from the changes coming in Medicaid. In the southern region, excuse me, yeah. In the southern region, most states are, as a share of their unsourced revenue, are again below that kind of 15-year long-term trend, and as are most states. That is something again that we expect to start really shifting as Medicaid costs increase, and state spending remains constrained by any number of things. So I highlighted a few of our indicators, but I also wanted to highlight some of just the larger economic questions that we've looked at. So tariffs are a couple of my colleagues did an analysis on tariffs a few months back, and it showed that every state faces some economic and fiscal exposure to the higher import costs from the rise in tariffs. Overall, the imports make up about 11% of the economy. Some states it's much higher, including including states where some of you live. The biggest risks fall on states with economies built around manufacturing: Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, Tennessee. The other piece of that is states with major ports deeply tied to global trade. That would be Georgia, South Carolina, Texas. Those are some of the higher ranking states here with that. But in talking with state budget officers and economists around the country and in many of these states, what they found is that this story is still unfolding. The states have not, as far as a budget impact, and thinking about it in terms of states' own spending, how is this going to increase the cost of goods for the stuff that states buy? How is it going to affect our economic output? Those things have not shown up yet as in terms of a budget impact. One of the reasons is because many contracts and spending plans were set before the new tariffs took effect, so haven't shown up yet. But certainly, people in budget offices and fiscal offices are watching. Right now, the key challenge then for state budgets isn't necessarily those higher costs or not, or lost revenue, but it is this rapid rise in uncertainty. And so I mentioned earlier on about lowered revenue forecasts this past spring. This rise in uncertainty regarding tariffs was one of those reasons. And I wanted to also highlight our recently published, very, very recently published series, State Fiscal Debates to Watch. We published this. This is the third year that we have done this. And we highlight 5 fiscal debates to watch, and they just published this week. We do one piece every day for 5 days. And there are like deep dives. So I mentioned the news analysis type pieces that we do on a regular basis. These are written with that same kind of readable tone, but definitely deep dives into policy issues that we are watching, that we expect to be focal points of debate and policymaking in the upcoming legislative session. They all have budget impacts. Certainly, the tightening fiscal conditions and budget deficits is a big one, and states right now are facing the most kind of constrained and certainly uncertain revenue. That sounds ironic, and uncertain operating environment since the early days of the pandemic. You've got upcoming changes in federal policy. You have that already kind of constrained or right sizing or whatever you want to call it, revenue environment, that's revenue normalization, but still certainly an adjustment period for states. They were already facing revenue pressure, and the spending pressures continue. And now you've got federal policy changes that have a budget impact either in the next year or in the coming years. So it's a lot to juggle. Those Medicaid policy changes, the piece that came out this Tuesday talks about many of the things that I had mentioned. But one of the things I did want to point out, as I was just talking to Justin Thiel, who was one of the authors on that piece, is that many states have triggers related to Medicaid expansion. So those states that have expanded, if anything changes with that, with the federal match, then expansion goes away. And that is where some of that Medicaid savings is expected to come from. But comparatively speaking, the federal government covered 90% of the cost of that. So states are saving on 10% of a much larger cost. So getting Medicaid expansion going away is more of a savings, is a far greater savings for the federal government than it is for states, and certainly with the upcoming SNAP costs, which are written into the law. Medicaid expansion, any savings from Medicaid expansion would be we expect would be very overtaken by the upcoming funding requirements in SNAP. Those ones are mandatory. So the first one is the administrative cost shift, which takes effect this October. And so that's going into the fiscal 2027 budgets, the increase in administrative costs. And then following that is the benefit cost share that it's expected to apply to most states. And this is all dependent, of course, on the error rate in states' SNAP programs. And so there's a big focus right now on reducing error rates. And I can get much more into that. That's the piece that I wrote. So I could go on and on about error rates if anybody wants me to. The other big thing, one of the other big things regarding the federal uncertainty is, of course, disaster funding. There have been some changes already. There's a lot more potential changes. Some of them could be beneficial to states, such as block funding for FEMA. States and localities have long been asking for more flexibility and speed on federal aid, and that is one way they could get it. But there are other changes that might make it more difficult to receive that aid. So, and then the last piece that we wanted to highlight is the efficiency initiatives that states announced. Many states announced efficiency initiatives last year. This is like a checkup on how those are going, and with a particular eye towards how AI is being used and or experimented with by states and within state agencies, and how that affects how workers are using them, how agencies are using them, and in addition to how that helps them provide services to their residents. This is like my stable fiscal management tools slide, and usually I'm tired of hearing myself talk by the time I get to it. But in the interest of being a good fiscal policy person, and I know some of the questions are about this, so I'll just plug this real quick and then turn it back over to questions. So those long-term budget assessments are multi-year looks forward at the budget. It helps, again, using data helps lawmakers get a line of sight on, we may not have a budget, we may not have a deficit now, but the way trends are going with our revenue and with our spending, we're going to have one next year or the year after. It's really good to know that ahead of time. Budget stress tests are very helpful when it comes to rainy day fund reserves, especially because they can run different scenarios, recession or recession-like scenarios or policy shocks, to see how revenue and spending within your state might respond to that. It helps lawmakers determine what might be an appropriate amount to set aside in reserve. Maybe they've been saving too much. Maybe they've been saving too little. These are, again, like really data-driven policy tools that can help lawmakers just kind of strike a good balance between maintaining strong strong fiscal health, while also being able to deliver the services that their residents want. Okay, I'm done now. So I will stop sharing, and we can get to the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. Uh, so yeah, first I'll go over some pre-submitted questions, but just a reminder to folks that you can submit them in the chat or via the Q&A section at the bottom of your little toolbar on Zoom. And if we have time, we'll try to get to some of those live ones as well. So one of the first pre-submitted questions that we got a lot dealt with one of the first things you mentioned when you talked about how many states, particularly in the South, are entering 2026 with strong reserves and strong rainy day funds. Even if they are starting to fall, they are in a strong place now.
Mm-hmm.
But what does the data suggest about how much flexibility those reserves actually provide? I know you talked about using operating days versus any other measure. But yeah, just sort of what sort of flexibility do those provide? Does having a strong reserve fund or rainy day fund,
Yeah,
how does
absolutely.
that help states?
Yeah. So again, yeah, that flexibility is really the best way to kind of assess that is by thinking about it in terms of operating days. Um, because it depends on how long can the reserves hold us over. Now, no state, of course, uses the reserves to pay for every single day, of the budget, but it's a good measure because it gives you a sense of how much spending cushion do we actually have here, and so that's one piece of it. But the other piece is those dollar amounts too. Like some states can put money into their reserves and still reduce capacity just because either they've invested in more spending or what have you. So much depends on just a state's overall spending plans and trajectory and their revenue patterns. It's one of the reasons why we recommend things like having kind of revenue surplus triggers or like reserve deposit rules based on maybe a volatile revenue stream that might go over. Maryland has that. Tennessee does that as well. But in terms of the other point about flexibility too is that it's as you've kind of seen in those graphs, it is being eroded. There's the federal uncertainty. There was the existing kind of revenue constraint that states were facing the last year or so. Some states have already dipped into the reserves and among other things, to try to balance some budget deficits. Maryland is another one, to be faced with more choices this year. The budget deficit is back and it's worse.
Thanks, Liz. That was very helpful. Um, I know it wasn't on your slides, but I do know that we've heard from folks that due to some of the uncertainty and the volatility surrounding gas taxes and how that's historically been used to help
Mm.
fund infrastructure and transportation infrastructure in particular, states have had to transfer funds more from the general fund or from various reserves to make up the difference, so to speak. And are there any specific budget practices or policy choices that you're seeing more as states are trying to, um, you know, uh, make these funds workable and stable while dealing with the realities that the gas tax is not necessarily providing that stability and that workability that it used to?
Yeah, tell me about it. And it was very validating also to see this question because one of our issues to watch last year was transportation funding. And so what we saw in reporting out that piece is road usage charges come up a lot. Most states have done or are doing some kind of pilot on them. I think Oregon is adopted. I could be wrong about that, but a few states, Hawaii definitely has adopted it. Virginia and Utah and Oregon have voluntary programs in place. I believe I should have written this down ahead of time, but Oregon seemed close to becoming the next state to do that, but I actually never did. I don't remember what happened with that one. But let's take Hawaii, for example. It's phasing it in like over a while. And what are voluntary road usage charges? First of all, it's like a pay by mile kind of thing. Versus gas tax. It speaks directly to that issue that EVs have presented, which is they don't use any gas, obviously, but they definitely use the roads. Certainly EV growth adoption has accelerated, and it's not as fast as of late, but it is still a thing that is happening. And moreover, and it's not just EVs. And in fact, EVs are a small slice of it, and it's really just about fuel efficiency overall. I I bought a hybrid recently, or a couple of years ago, and I did this whole like personal deep dive into the cost effectiveness of an EV versus hybrid, and there were spreadsheets, and this is what I do in my spare time. Um, but in the back of my mind, because I'm a giant nerd, I was like, man, I felt bad about cheating my home state, but so because I live in a rural area and there are a lot of roads that I drive on. So, um, but again, so I'm part of the problem. But so the solution that a lot of states are looking at, but Hawaii is really the first to kind of make that leap, is those road usage charges. I think all eyes are going to be on them as they implement that, because the key is, of course, consumer mindset. We don't even see the taxes we pay at the gas pump, but we do see those road usage charges. It's the same difference between people who own their home and actually get that property tax bill and they get their eyeballs on it, versus people who it's all just rolled into the escrow and the mortgage payment and they don't really see it. So that's that adoption and mindset is a big hurdle. Some of the previous questions around this method, around like privacy and technology, there have been those have been largely addressed. And so that is a big one. But also, we're just seeing other states with sales taxes kind of siphon off portions of sales taxes for their transportation funds. The idea of a transportation fund is based on usage. Like, if you use it, you pay for it, which was great decades ago, but it's not increasing. It's increasingly just not being workable, and short of raising gas taxes to a point that can cover it, short of charging more tolls and going that route. States are looking at some of the other options that might be more palatable in the long term for folks.
Absolutely. And you're right. It's not just the EV thing. I know even personally going from like a 2008 model to a 2017 model, fuel
Yeah.
efficiency doubled. And so that's cutting in half the
Wow.
gas taxes, I personally was paying, and that's, outdated by now. So that car. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so we're all part of the problem there. Um, and so one of the other questions we had from folks a lot was that, states in the South, um, as you showed with your chart with the Medicaid and with other things, they have a greater dependence on federal funding for these programs, and they also have a lower tax base, often by choice. We've seen a lot of income tax cuts and property tax cuts now, is a trending issue now.
Mm-hmm.
But we're seeing a shift to that. And so what budget practices or policy choices are y'all seeing as the most important right now for states to help maintain their fiscal resilience without overcommitting scarce resources, given the uncertainty surrounding federal funding and the constraints as tax bases shrink?
Yeah. That policy slide I showed you. I mean, those are big ones, because again, just that emphasis on pulling back a little from the current year or last year or next year, and kind of looking at what is the long-term trajectory. That kind of window into the future right now is a little bit fuzzier because of the federal funding changes. I mean, these changes are historic, especially when you consider the ones happening with SNAP funding. So states are kind of so looking at budget reserves, and determining how reserves might be able to help be a bridge through whatever it is you're trying to get to, whether it's spending less, whether it's finding more revenue to cover it, whether it's probably a combination of both. Um, Reserves are key, and right now that is probably one of the state's strongest, kind of fiscal health points. Um, Pensions, which were the big to do a decade ago and the decade after the Great Recession, states did a lot of work there. Those are the healthiest they've been in a very, very long time overall. The In difficult times, there is a temptation to skip pension payments or delay, and so that's something I would be watchful for. How can we maintain the progress that we have maintained on these long-term liabilities, and not step backwards? It's easy for me to say, much more difficult to do. But having that kind of forward-looking eye towards where's our revenue trending and where's our spending trending, what can we do about either, and what do we need in savings to help bridge us in case any of this goes in a different direction.
Absolutely. And sort of building off that, I noticed, on the fiscal management tools slide, more states, obviously most states had neither, but more states had used both budget stress tests and long-term budget assessments versus just one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Is there, have you all found that there's a particular reason why that was the case instead of just using one tool? There, more states are using both.
I I don't know the answer to
Mhm.
that question. Um, but I will say that my some of my colleagues too have done much more work in this area in terms of just kind of getting the word out, working with policymakers
Mhm.
on that. And typically, I mean, I don't want to call it a domino effect because I feel like that has a negative connotation, but it's like once you get a taste, it does just make sense to do. If you're doing one, you might as well do the other. I mean, they're completely different practices, but in terms of that policy mindset of ensuring your fiscal house is in order, kind of getting the sandbags around, whatever it is in case there's a storm. Both of those are really good tools, and kind of once you've gotten there, it does make sense to do both.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'm with you. Domino effect for some reason I always connotate negatively as well. But you're right, it's also positive, right? If one of your neighboring states is doing it and they are showing up on all these charts as being very fiscally healthy and strong, it stands to reason that you may be like, hey, we should look at what they're doing and copy it. So that's a
Mm-hmm.
positive domino effect. Um, Briefly, I know you talked very briefly about the error rates and your work on
Mm.
that for the Fiscal Debates to Watch series. Could you just go a little bit more detail about what exactly your work is entailing there?
Yeah, so with the SNAP funding issues, for the first time since SNAP was became law 60 years ago, states may have to pay a share of benefit costs, and how much they pay is dependent upon the accuracy of their SNAP payments. So, which error rates? That's what we're referring to there. But an error rate is not an indication of wrongdoing on anyone's part. It is just an error, literally. It's a fielding error on the baseball field, and so error rates are calculated by uh, obviously with a set of cases. They don't examine every single case that it goes out, but a set of cases, and they look at what payments were overpayments and what payments were underpayments, and they take that dollar amount of whatever was inaccurate, either too much or too little, and divide it by the overall amount of dollars that went out that year. And that is your error rate. And so the significance of that is, states have always had to, if their error rate is 6% or over, they've always had to submit plans to the federal government about what they're going to do to lower it and all this stuff. But now, for the first time ever, it is tied to states' potential liabilities in terms of what they may owe in terms of their cost share, starting in 2028 for a lot of places, by the end of the decade for everyone. Some places with higher error rates will get the opportunity to delay having to pay their cost share. But that is where the real kind of real fiscal risk is. The administrative cost that kicks in, it's not small, but the error rate payment is significantly larger. And so, and the real kicker there with that is that it's based on, it's based on your most recent error rate. And so error rates change from year to year. So your benefits cost share, because it's like the sliding scale, the higher your error rate, the more you're gonna pay. Your benefits share could change from year to year. And I'll throw out, I was just looking at this because Nevada, as an example, right now, if you look at their most recent error rate, which doesn't count at all towards whatever they're going to owe, but it's all the data that we have. Their most recent error rate, if they maintain that, it's like 5.94%. If they maintain that, then they won't at least have to pay a cost share in 2028. If it goes up a teeny tiny smidge to 6%, from 5.94 to 6, that will trigger, they will have a cost share, and that is like $50 million. And so not a small amount, not not an insignificant amount for sure. And certainly if you're a state that's dancing around that 6% line, that does create some volatility there from year to year in budgeting.
Absolutely. And yeah, like you said, 50 million, it's not, a budget breaking, but it's also not a small amount, especially when you're facing competing options between, cutting your tax base further or investing in other things.
Exactly.
Uh, and so I know we only have a few minutes left, so I'll try to combine sort of the last two questions. So now, while reserves and short-term budgets and collections are relatively healthy and stable, um, sort of what fiscal challenges or longer-term liabilities that are under the radar should lawmakers look at now while things are good
Hmm.
before or if things decline later on?
Yeah, and this is a great question, especially for this audience, uh, because I think under the radar challenges. I mentioned SNAP, and I think that kind of it's certainly not under the radar. People know about this, but I think one of the under the radar things is that volatility potential from year to year. Another piece of that is that because of the lag in federal reporting with error rates, any changes made now to improve the error rate won't actually have a budget impact until like 3 years from now. So having that again, just kind of that long-term kind of larger lens mindset about this, investments now could pay off, but they're not going to pay off next year. And so just setting those expectations around that, I think, is really important. But the other piece is infrastructure, water infrastructure in particular. We've seen states like Texas do some really neat things in that area in terms of supporting local governments with loans or funding, revolving loan funds, really prioritizing the fact that our infrastructure, as we all know, is aging, but water infrastructure in particular does need some attention now, considering the growth of data centers and the strain on water systems that puts. As states move forward to and want to attract data centers, that creates strains on infrastructure that also need to be addressed.
Absolutely. And you said the magic word data centers. I feel like we're hearing about that in everything. We just released two pieces on it because you're seeing folks talk about how it affects your base load and utility usage, water, like you said, land and zoning rights,
Mm-hmm.
tax incentives and job creation. So they're definitely the sort of issue to watch, right? If you could pick one that
Oh, for
affects all
sure.
the different areas of policy.
Yes.
But yes, you're right. Fiscal year 2029 and 2030 will be here before we know it. So
I know.
start investing now, right? And then you'll see the benefits later on. So I think that's great parting advice for all of our lawmakers on attendance as they um,
It's
head
good
back
personal
to
advice too.
sessions. Yes, yeah, right. Yeah, start budgeting for 5 years from now. Don't wait until it is a rainy day, right, to pull out your umbrella.
Exactly.
Have it ready. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Liz, and thank you so much to everyone for joining us. As I mentioned, we'll have links to all of Liz's work and her colleagues at Pew's work. As she mentioned, they do all sorts of stuff on Medicaid, SNAP, the FEMA, pretty much any fiscal issue. So I'll be sure to send out her information to connect you all. But with that, I'll let you all enjoy the rest of your Friday and the holiday weekend. And thank you so much to Liz and everyone else for joining us. And have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so
Thanks for
much.
having me.
Bye, everyone.